What is up, everybody? This is the Sharp Angles podcast, the Thursday edition of the Sharp Angles podcast, where we preview the fantasy football week to come. My name is Raymond Summerlin, and if we're talking about fantasy football, if it's sharpfootballanalysis.com, if it's a Sharp Angles podcast, there's only one person to talk about fantasy football with, and that is the one, the only, the Swami of Konami, Mr. Rich Hribar. How we doing, Rich?
We're doing good, man. It's like 28 degrees outside. I'm not going to go out there. I haven't been out there all week. So it's weird, man. It's Christmas season. The kids got the lights behind me. I'm gonna sport them because they wanted me to have some Christmas lights and have some cheer. I couldn't find a Santa hat. Maybe I'll find one in the next couple weeks.
It is currently a brisk 58 in in central Texas. But if you could hear it in my voice, and I'm probably going to try to talk a little less on this podcast, which I know will make everybody happy. It's like I'm so stuffed up. Like there's something in the air that's actively trying to kill me. And those of you watching on YouTube, which I would recommend you do. We do this live every single Thursday. I say every single Thursday. We didn't do it last Thursday. It was Thanksgiving. I hope that you will forgive us for that. But we do it live almost every single Thursday on YouTube. Go to YouTube, search Sharp Football Analysis, subscribe. You'll get notified every time we go live. Rich and I do this on Thursday. We do a waiver wire podcast on Monday afternoons. Warren Sharp goes live on Tuesday and Fridays. So lots of stuff on the YouTube channel. Go and check it out. But those of you watching live on YouTube, you will look at me and you will think, I'm shocked to learn that person uses a CPAP to sleep at night. It's really surprising that this guy would use a CPAP, but I do. And I'll tell you what, when you're all stuffed up, and if you're lucky like me and you're a nose breather, you could just wear the little nose pillows. It's wonderful. It's great. But when you can't breathe out of your nose, I don't think I've slept right in like 4 days. So I'm just telling you right off the bat, Rich, this could go off the rails. Everything could be wild on this episode.
And that's probably the week it's going to be for a lot of people. I mean, for most leagues, this is the final week of the regular season.
Yeah,
You
there you
need
go.
something to happen for your team. You might need some help from another team that has other weird things going on because there's all these good players on bye. We talked about it 2 weeks ago when we had the other 16 bye week. I was like, week 14 is going to probably be worse when we get there. And you don't really fully grasp it until you actually have to start to do the actual player rankings. Cause like there's not even a reason to put numbers next to guys this week. Like it's just like Calvin Ridley's like wide receiver 9. You're like, what is happening?
What are we even doing here? Like we have our our Slack where we talk with Warren Sharp and we try to come up with prop picks. That's all available as part of our prop betting package, which by the way has done very well this year. Thanks in large part to Rich Hribar and all the work that he's been doing. But we talk about it a lot. And yeah, I found myself yesterday making the case for Calvin Ridley, and I was like, okay, I guess that's where we are this week. I guess that's what we're doing. I mentioned to you before we got on, I'm in the Scott Fish Bowl. Thankfully, I've made it this far. And the two quarterbacks I had been riding here are Lamar Jackson and Bo Nix. So we're gonna see if this ride ends this week. But there's a lot of that going on. And you're right. It is, if you're in FFPC and you happen to make it to the Super Bowl of your league, that this is the Super Bowl. This is like, okay, am I going to win some money just for my league or not? That's this week. And if you happen to have, I don't know, Jaden Daniels and Joe Mixon on your team and we're riding them, like some people might have, perhaps some people on this call might have, then you're like, what are we supposed to do here? And so it's just like, it's frustrating that the NFL has done this to us. I wish that they didn't. I wish they respected the large role that fantasy football, and betting is becoming more and more important. But for a long time, fantasy football was really driving the interest in the sport and the growth in the interest in the sport. And the fact that they've done this in week 14, I'm just like, can we get someone in that room that says, maybe not the Ravens. Maybe not the Ravens in week 14. Maybe not them.
I think what makes this week stand out too, even more than the previous 6-teamer, is just the amount of value picks that are on bye, like in the context of the whole season. I mean, you brought up Jaden Daniels, a tremendous, like he's been a guy that you caught at value and is probably, and you have these picks that outkick their coverage, then you probably have built really good teams. So if you have Terry McLaurin, Joe Mixon, Cortland Sutton, right? Like these are, Brian Robinson has been one of the better, running back picks at cost. So like these guys being off are significant because they're what turned teams that probably missed a pick or two earlier on and one put a band-aid over those, or if those teams hit on those picks, like if you got Saquon Barkley, right? If you got Nico Collins, well, he's off by too, or like,
Yeah, there you go.
but like, they turn those teams into juggernauts. Like, so like that's what's
Yeah.
significant. Is like a lot of the value picks from this season are off.
Yeah. Jamar Chase, there's one because you could have definitely been you definitely could have been a Jamar Chase Saquon team. And in that case, you're feeling pretty good. There are a couple interesting things going on in the chat. Remember, we do have a chat over on YouTube. You can hit it. We'll try to answer as many questions as we can out of there. 18 degrees here in St. Louis. From Adam's Digest. It's first week on the site. Thank you. 18 degrees. No, couldn't relate. It's gonna be we're gonna get mid 60s today here in Texas, so that's good. And then from Joe here, Aidan O'Connell week. I hope it is because I have replaced that Scott Fishbowl league. I got Aidan O'Connell in there. You in on Aidan O'Connell with me against Tampa Bay? We riding this train?
I mean, listen, I'm 50-50 on 2 players for Uncut Gems, and one's Aidan O'Connell. So we'll see what happens at the end of the show.
Here we are, Aidan O'Connell a week. And then we have here, I want to believe this is a Wicks week. We were promised in week 5. Will they get 20 points early, make it to 30? Yeah, I mean, we're recording this. We record this on Thursday mornings before Thursday Night Football. If you're listening to this after Thursday Night Football, you will obviously know the result of this. But I was surprised whenever Romeo Doubs was ruled out. Was that surprising to you as well? It was a strange one. I kind of thought he would play. But even going into like last week, we didn't really. I mean, last week also could have been the Wicks week, and it hasn't happened. And the thing about Wicks that's interesting is, and I brought it up, heading into last week, is that we continue to see this growth, right? We continue to see his opportunities grow whenever one of the top wide receivers is out, but he's just been unimaginably inefficient with his targets this year. He drops way too many passes, but even more than that, like it just seems like they're not connecting, they're not hitting. And can he end up with the 2 touchdowns and do it on Dontavian Wicks things? Absolutely, he can do that. But it is, I think. I think us as a site as a whole are certainly much more interested in Jaden Reed tonight on Thursday Night Football than we are, in Wicks, and try to play that. Is he just finally going to catch the targets kind of game?
Yeah, the one thing you have going for you is, they are road dogs. They've been the last, since they've come back from bye, they've basically been in positive game scripts too. So like that's kind of reduced the pass volume. So we're hoping to see more of a drop back game from the Packers tonight, on the road in Detroit to give some more opportunities. I haven't seen if Carlton Davis is for sure up or not for tonight. Maybe we have to go into the inactives to see, but I know, it looked like he was going to play after he didn't play last week. They've just been a lot better against outside receivers than interior wide receivers, which is why we like Jaden Reed. And, but if Carlton Davis is out, it does give him another added opportunity with the projected maybe uptick in pass volume. But again, if you want to score fantasy points, you got to catch football. And we saw I think it was the opening drive on Thanksgiving. He had a pass to convert a first down and put it down again. Like, you got to catch the football.
Yeah, no, it's that Moneyball meme. This is Dontavian Wicks. The good news is he's always open. The bad news is he never catches the football. And so at some point you gotta catch it. But the other side of that is if he does just catch a couple of these, we know that the opportunity is there, and so that's the risk reward you're running with him, or at least the opportunity has been there for him. One more here before we really get started, because I think it's an interesting one. Any good streaming options at quarterback this week? Stafford, Caleb Williams, Jameis, Russ Wilson. Actually, some of those names are names that are not available in a ton of leagues. Stafford and Russell Wilson are not really available in a ton of leagues. Caleb Williams and Jameis are. I had Caleb ahead of Jameis Winston in the waiver column because it's not a great matchup for Caleb, but we've seen a lot of good things. Obviously, the coaching staff, the change up top is not going to change what we've seen with Thomas Brown calling the offense, and so that's good. And then the other thing is Caleb Williams has been running. He's averaged just under 50 yards rushing in his 3 games with Thomas Brown, and we've seen the 49ers give up some rushing points. And obviously this 49ers defense is not what it has been. I think Nick Bosa was a DMP on Wednesday, so we'll have to see, if he's back. And so out of that list, Stafford going up against the Bills defense, I don't know. And you're so reliant on his passing efficiency, with Russ and Jameis, what is that game going to turn into? Obviously, it was weather last time, and that's why we didn't see this massive passing volume. But like the Steelers have given up, they got touched up by Joe Burrow, but I think that's the first time they've given up anything resembling a good quarterback game since like week 5. And so I don't think that's a good matchup. So I'm probably leaning Caleb here, but yeah, some of, that's kind of where I am.
Yeah, I mean, those are better options than probably a lot of gamers have if you're
Yeah.
dipping into the stream. Well, if you haven't planned ahead for this, I think a lot of people are looking at like, oh, well, Levis plays the Jaguars, or in like we were talking about Aidan O'Connell, probably right. Like those are the guys are
Mm,
like they're hoping to get something out of Cooper Rush on Monday night, right? So at least those
yeah.
are better options. I mean, I have all of those players. I have Caleb Williams and Jameis Winston back to back at 16, 17 this week, but I have all those players in like the top half of like rankings. So like those are at least viable names.
And I said just one more comment, but Mauricio's in here saying, sorry, not so much for beating you in King's Classic. So I appreciate the smack talk because I know he's not talking about me.
He's out me, yeah.
Congratulations on your big win. All right, let's move on and play some real or fake, talking about things as we kind of move through the fantasy season. Do we think this is real? Do we think this is fake? Is this going to continue? All of that kind of stuff. And the first one is obviously the biggest fantasy news of the week, where we saw Christian McCaffrey go down on in that game against the Bills, and it always kind of looked like that was going to be into the season. But then on Monday, actually, as Tucker and I were recording on Monday, we saw the news that Jordan Mason is also going to be out. I'm going to say for a while because they still have not put him on injured reserve, although that was the expectation. But he's definitely not playing this week. And so the question then becomes, all right, what do we do from here? The obvious answer is Isaac Guerendo. And so I guess from like a real or fake perspective, if the real or fake is Isaac Guerendo will be a weekly fantasy starter kind of the rest of the way.
Yeah, he's absolutely going to be an RB2 plus. Like it just depends on how many touchdown opportunities and how many pass catches we get from him. I think from a rushing perspective, you're going to get solid usage from him like we were getting from Jordan Mason. I also think people's probably perception of what Jordan Mason was giving us for fantasy is probably skewed from what he did like at the very start of the year than what he was giving us up until Christian McCaffrey returned. He was basically living as what I said, like a rushing dependent RB2. Like he was not operating at RB1 levels. So we still probably won't get that from Isaac Guerendo, but this is it. Like we haven't had a running back on waivers. I mean, you write the column every week. Like we have not had a running back that like had starting potential that was available on waivers since when? Like hope like Audric Estime was like the last hopeful dude. Like I mean,
Yeah,
we've
I
gone
mean
like
the only ones that we've like even remotely hit were Tank Bigsby that I can think of off the top of my head. I can go through
mhm.
the rest of the column and figure it out. And then Bucky Irving, which thankfully,
Yeah.
if I'm going to pat myself on the back, I was very early on Bucky Irving, and Bucky Irving has, especially this last few weeks, really hit. But this has been, and this is that's kind of a microcosm of this whole idea of what lineups are winning and what lineups are advancing in Best Ball Mania, for instance. These running back heavy lineups are winning because we haven't had what we normally have every year, which is 3, 4, 5, big injuries that lead to these, really high end waiver wire opportunities that you would spend your
All your
fab
fab,
on.
yeah.
Part of it is because we certainly don't have those like real workhorse guys at the same level that we once did. But even those real workhorse guys, they just haven't gotten hurt, right? And so like if Saquon Barkley gets hurt, then you're going to go and spend a lot of fab on somebody. Again, we don't really know who that would be because I still kind of contend Kenneth Gainwell gets the touches in game now, but I kind of think that would be Will Shipley, and that's who I'd spend my fab on. Just as an aside, if Saquon Barkley happens to get hurt this week, please don't Saquon Barkley because
Do not get hurt.
that would ruin my life. It would absolutely ruin my life. So please don't do that. But that kind of idea, it's not even that we haven't had the injuries. It's even if we did in the instances that we did have the injuries, it wasn't like guaranteed. And so I guess Jordan Mason is the real answer, but even though that was more before the season. But yeah, it hasn't been there. So this is the first time we've really had a running back that you're just like, all right, spend it all. And that's what I wrote in the column. I was like, just spend it all. Well, like
Oh,
this is your opportunity. This is the time. If, every dollar you need to spend, see what else everybody else has left. Every dollar you need to spend, go and get him. And even if he is just kind of what you say, if he's kind of like, I think you had him running back 17 this week, like kind of in that range, that is so much better than pretty much anything we've gotten off the
yeah.
running back waiver wire so far this year.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is a player that you should have some excitement for. I mean, I'm writing up pre-draft, and being kind of intrigued. He was a guy that I thought was going to be landing spot dependent, and he landed in a really good spot for him because he's 220 pounds. He ran a 4.340. He had like amazing, like whatever you use, the relative athletic score, like explosion score, wherever you look, this guy pops. Like he's like made a Madden character. Like if you could create him, he didn't really play a lot. He was very raw. This will only be his second career start since high school this week. But he was an outside zone run like master at Louisville. I mean, 65% of his runs were outside zone runs. He averaged 6 yards per carry on those runs. But the thing about him that was intriguing about his profile was that he was really good at getting yards after contact, especially plays hitting the backfield. And that's carried over on his very small sample so far this season. But on 42 runs this season, he leads the 49ers in yards after contact per rush. So that bails him out here. The matchup is good. The Bears, like they've been more vulnerable on the ground through the air. So he should get a nice little workload. It just depends on, do they play with him at like the goal line, right? Do we see because we saw when he came in the Seattle game, they gave Juszczyk a goal line carry. Those are just like the things that you like can maybe pry away from like a fantasy ceiling. But like you said, like you're getting an RB2 like already and upside for more if like certain things play out. So you have to feel really good about the situation the rest of the way, just to have one of these bodies to be able to put in your lineup. Because there are lineups that definitely, even though guys had running backs not get injured, and there are a lot of rosters this year that did good at running back, it's always a needy position.
Yeah, especially if you were somebody that, went wide receiver heavy and maybe you hit enough and were able to cobble enough together. I actually forgot about a waiver wire guy. Kareem Hunt is obviously on that list as well. Even though when that happened, we didn't blow all our fab on Kareem Hunt because it was such a nebulous situation, which is again is one of those problems. Remember, we had Carson Steele and Samaje Perine, and like we didn't really know. But so there was all that happening as well. So there's another one. Speaking of Kareem Hunt, I guess our next kind of real or fake situation here is that Kansas City backfield situation. And the question is kind of coming out of this first game with Isiah Pacheco on that Black Friday, will Isiah Pacheco be a reliable weekly fantasy starter at some point here over the back half of the season?
I still question it, but they need him. The question is the Chiefs is just how much urgency, like, they just don't feel like they have any urgency. Like, because look at DeAndre Hopkins. DeAndre Hopkins has been so good per opportunity, and they're just not playing him. Like, they're just kind of like, he's just still got like, he's still kept in a little bit of bubble wrap, and they're waiting for the playoffs. It just feels like that with the Chiefs. So is that a situation where Pacheco just shares time with Kareem Hunt? I mean, Kareem Hunt, like we've talked about, has been so inefficient. And this team, over their past 7 games, they're 27th in the NFL in yards per play, the Kansas City Chiefs. And now that the defense is starting to get a little bit more vulnerable, you're starting to see some really cracks in the foundation for this team. Early on in the season, it was like, well, the Chiefs will be the Chiefs. The defense is so good. It's the best defense in the Mahomes era. Well, now that doesn't looking as hot. that takes not looking as hot. They're not rushing the pass the same way since Jalen Watson's been out. They're not stopping the pass the same way. They're just relying on like these random events at the end of these games to pull these games out. But what Pacheco did, even he wasn't like great on his first game on Friday, but he at least gave you an explosive. He hit a 34-yard run. This is a team that's dead last in the NFL on explosive runs. And I just talked about their yards per play. Like they just need players on the field that can generate big plays. And at least Isiah Pacheco provides that. Now, the question is just how much more does he continue to pull away from Kareem Hunt? Does he ever overtake him? And does he overtake him near the goal line? Because Hunt, was always my one concern coming back, is that even if it becomes a Pacheco over Hunt situation, has Hunt earned enough the past 2 years by just being a goal line back? Like, does he just end up being the goal line back? And then that becomes a problem for Pacheco too, because we already know that Samaje Perine is going to do his thing where he runs around on all these pass plays. But Hunt outsnapped him 3-1 inside the 10-yard line. So I still question it. It remains to be seen. I don't have a firm take on it. I just feel it's very nebulous.
That's where I am as well. And I think your point about it is like the one that really pay attention based on the track record we have with Kansas City, the way they've used Travis Kelce, in the regular season in the past couple of years, especially last year and early this season when they had options at wide receiver, kind of the way that we saw them bring on Rashee Rice last year. And then again, the way that we saw them kind of work Pacheco into the lineup in this game. And not even just that, but the fact that he wasn't active for the Panthers game, right? Which it seemed like he probably could have been. They're in such autopilot mode in this regular season. I mean, they've mostly wrapped up the regular season. Obviously, they're going to have to keep winning to hold off the Bills for the number 1 seed. And so that is at least a carrot for them to chase. But how much I have no doubt that when we get into the playoffs and when like it's time to actually do this, it's going to be the Pacheco show because Pacheco is just a much better running back and a much more efficient and explosive running back than Kareem Hunt is at this point in Kareem Hunt's career. And I just have some numbers for that. Among 57 qualified backs, Kareem Hunt is 46th in yards per carry, 54th in explosive run rate, and 53rd in yards after contact per rush. He's just not creating yards. That's not where kind of he is. He has been relatively, I guess, effective near the goal line. So maybe that continues. And if that continues, that really hurts Pacheco, especially if we're not going to get the receiving usage that we had from him at the end of last season that made, some of us kind of excited about what he could do this year. And so, yeah, so there's a lot of concern here, but the main one is just how much the Chiefs really want to push him. And if they don't really want to push him and he's only going to get even like 60% of the running back carries, then you're in a tough spot for a guy that if you were stashing him on your bench, if you didn't have an IR spot, you were hoping that this guy's going to come back and be somebody I can use in the fantasy playoffs. And unless we see like a real big shift this week, then it's going to be really tough to trust him. You're just hoping at that point for, big plays and maybe long touchdowns if he can't take that goal line work from Kareem Hunt.
Yeah, we did, and we talked about it, mentioned with Guerendo, the Trent Williams still looks like he's gonna be trending to be out, and then the Chief that ties into this Chiefs thing because like the Chiefs left tackle situation is a disaster. Like they
Yeah,
were playing Joe
good.
Tooney at left tackle in the second half of that game. They're trying everything.
Yeah,
This is why I mean,
it's
I know
interesting.
last year, like I kept pushing you, like, when we get to the playoffs, the Chiefs will Chiefs. I am like the opposite. I feel like I feel like you were last year at the end of the year. Like I feel like this is waiting to be a house of cards situation for the Chiefs. Like I feel like they have
Well,
this devil magic has to end.
Well, I have good news for you. You're going to feel like an idiot on February, whatever 14th or whatever the Super Bowl is, and they just walking around with their third straight
Yep.
Super Bowl because that's how I felt. Because you're right. The entire last year, I'm sounding the alarm. I go, this isn't right. This team is not right. It's not working. And then thank you, Mr. Commissioner. Thank you, whoever it was that gave them. Was it was it Fox? Yeah. Thank you, Terry Bradshaw, for this trophy. And then they're walking around with another Lombardi. And so yeah, you're gonna be, it kind of is what it is, but we'll see. It feels, I don't know, it feels very similar to last year to me, but also Rashee Rice isn't coming back and coming through that door. But then you say, well, maybe you mentioned DeAndre Hopkins, maybe they just actually start playing DeAndre Hopkins in the playoffs, and maybe he actually runs a route on 95% of the dropbacks, and it doesn't matter. So like, and they start targeting Travis Kelce again. So I
Yep.
guess
Here
we'll
we
have to
go.
see. I know. We have to we're going to talk about a few of your questions here in just a second. I do want to mention though, running a sale over at the site sharpfootballanalysis.com. Over there you can read every single preview for every single game this week from Rich Hribar. Previews every fantasy relevant player, every game, every week. We call it the worksheet. It is worth the price of admission, and you can get access to our fantasy package or our NFL Plus package, which includes our betting recommendations from Warren Sharp, which have been outstanding this year. I believe $100 better is up something like $12,000 using our betting recommendations this year. All of that is available over at sharpfootballanalysis.com. Use the promo code ANGLES. You'll get 20% off everything that we have to offer there. So go and check that out. All right, a couple questions here. We don't really do start sit, but I am kind of interested in this question. Should I start Ridley in revenge game versus the Jags or Tyreek's versus the Jets? I have no faith in Tyreek this year. Well, we've already kind of mentioned how highly you have Calvin Ridley ranked this week almost by default. But I am interested in the Tyreek Hill kind of side of this because Tyreek Hill, when I look at this question, if you'd ask kind of this question, well, Calvin Ridley's been up and down, was up and down last year as well. But like you think of Tyreek Hill as like, all right, this is the explosive guy. This is the guy that, okay, maybe he's going to go and get you 30 points. And it just has not been that way since Tua's come back. He's turned into much more of a, hopefully gets enough targets and hopefully gets into the end zone that we can play him as kind of like a wide receiver too. It's kind of a weird thing we're having with Tyreek Hill right now.
That's the offense, the Miami Dolphins offense. I mean, they are tied for the fewest touchdowns outside of the red zone this season with just 2. They are 31st in plays that gain 20 or more yards. Only the New England Patriots have a lower rate than them. They rely, if you watch Miami Dolphins, they literally rely on just creating third and shorts and converting third and shorts. That's like their offense. Like they literally just gain like 7 yards at a time. They can't run the ball either this year. Other thing lost in kind of this offense from Mike McDaniel the first 2 years is they're a bad running team too. So it's, they've just relied on kind of a short passing. And this is why Achane and Jonnu have hit in fantasy the way they have. because the short passing game has kind of been like what's kind of kept this thing afloat the whole time. And you talk about it, like Tyreek, he's not bricking. Like it's not like a situation where like Tyreek has been a bust. He has been a bust relative to ADP and a disappointing pick in that sense, but like he's been startable. He hasn't finished lower than a wide receiver 3 since Tua returned. You're just not getting any spike weeks from him. He's just been a floor-based player. So if you feel like your matchup requires a floor-based player, I think he's playable. Now, if you say, I would like to shoot for a little more upside, which is wild to think in a conversation with Tyreek Hill, but if you would like to shoot for a little more upside, Calvin Ridley is getting more explosive targets. He's getting a higher target share. He has a better individual matchup, even though the Jets might be missing Sauce Gardner. I mean, yeah, if you're shooting for just for the moon where you don't care about floor at all, you're like, I don't care if I take a 0. Yeah, Calvin Ridley, I think, offers more upside. But if you only are like, I need 10 points, I need 10 PPR points, then you just got that guy's Tyreek Hill.
Another question here that is it's trying to make me feel pain, and that is, what do you guys think of Will Dissly this week? If you only knew the amount of money that Will Dissly cost me last week with his goose egg, his inexplicable goose egg, in my opinion. I'll just give my thoughts on it real quick. It looks like Ladd McConkey's going to play. He was limited on Wednesday. That does make you a little less excited about Dissly, but Dissly's route rate continues to be good. I kind of feel with Quentin Johnston, kind of the way he's going, and the fact that they're just not able really to feed him targets. This matchup against against the Chiefs is pretty good. I like Will Dissly again this week. I'm going back to the Will Dissly well this week, but that goose egg last week was tough to swallow for the biggest Will Dissly supporter in the world, yours truly. It was a tough one.
Yeah, I think you got to go back to him still this week, though. I mean, the opportunities were there. Well, the Chargers in general, I think, are an interesting conversation because I don't know if you read what I wrote about, Justin Herbert,
I
and
was going to ask you about it later. We don't even need to talk about the Chargers and Chiefs game. Like, I had planned to talk about that game, and I think
we
we've
just
covered
kind
it
of did.
all.
We just kind of
Yeah,
did
but
it.
I think I think my question was, or what I wanted to prompt you for was kind of your thoughts on the Justin Herbert thing, because I think your view kind of on how we may have jumped the gun on him a little bit is really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it's easy to see because Herbert we know is like a talented player, and he had the spike efficiency, and that's not was worried, but like he was getting there with like these added rushing points, and it was really cool to see, right? Like Justin Herbert getting rushing points is good. We know he's capable of adding that, but when the whole cake is built out of Justin Herbert rushing points, that's very fragile because he's not a guy that's going to be Lamar Jackson. He's not going to be Jaden Daniels, right? We know that. Like he's a guy where you want the rushing points to be the icing on the cake, right? Like you want to build up this foundation of stable passing points. And then if he gets you 40 rushing yards, you're like, wow, I got an extra passing touchdown out of it. And it takes a guy that maybe is like a high end QB2, low end QB1, and makes him like a mid range QB1. That's like the archetype that Justin Herbert is. And then I think we jumped the gun too on just saying like, oh, outside of Ladd McConkey, all these guys stink still. Like, and the Ladd McConkey was great last week, but when you still have Josh Palmer, Quentin Johnston, Will Dissly are like all the ancillary guys, that's still fragile on a week-to-week basis. Like, I think we got a little comfortable saying like this Chargers offense is going to be good. And you factor the running game into this too, because the loss of J.K. Dobbins is significant as well. Even though J.K. Dobbins he went through like a span where he was inefficient, he still was a guy that can get you like explosives and is a lot better running back than what all the other guys that the Chargers have put on the field this season have been. So even removing J.K. Dobbins is significant. And I wish I would have just like been a little more hesitant with him last week. This week you kind of almost don't have like you're kind of stuck. Some teams are stuck because all the teams on bye. But I think there is definitely some fragility there because if he doesn't run, like last week, he just didn't have to run. And you're stuck then because then you have to get a super hyper efficient passing game from him to get fantasy points. And that's harder to do. Like it's great when Quentin Johnston's uncovered for a 70-yard touchdown, but like we can't rely on those things to happen weekly. So he still is volatile. But Dissly, I think just from an opportunity stance and matchup stance, like especially a week with 6 teams on bye, like everything still stands out. I mean, he still is on the field for 70% of the dropbacks. We still seen the tight ends have scored the highest rate of fantasy points of the points allowed against the Chiefs. So like you still have to give him another shot, but there is volatility there.
Yeah, I mean that's the deal. Especially, I mean, you didn't even Dallas Goedert's likely out this week. Taysom Hill's already been, ruled out for the season. There's a lot of need at tight end, and so guys like him, or question here about Juwan Johnson. I'll actually talk about Juwan Johnson a little bit later. There's lots of that going on where you're like, oh, I guess we're just going to have to, see what we have here. We kind of were talking. You're talking about Justin Herbert. You might just have to start him this week. I'm in a dynasty league. I'm going to do my own start sit for you. I'm in a dynasty league with Herbert, Purdy, and Aidan O'Connell, and I am pretty sure I'm going to start Herbert, but I keep looking at Aidan O'Connell against Tampa Bay. And this is now the second time we brought him up after kind of what he was able to do last week. And I'm like, I mean, he's got Brock Bowers and he's got Jacoby Myers, and we saw what Bryce Young did last week, and we had this theory about this Bucks defense when they are actually healthy, and it didn't look great last week. So I don't know. I'm probably going to start Herbert, but it's funny that's even like running through my brain as I'm setting lineups here about what we can do this week. Another one here. This one's actually after my heart. They don't even know it because they directed it to you. Is the Mass Effect trilogy a better story than the original Star Wars trilogy? And the answer to that question is unequivocally yes. And y'all can come at me. Come at me if you like to. I guess it depends which finish you ended up with on Mass Effect 3, and maybe that's what determines it. Any thoughts? You want to make any fan groups angry at you?
I concur. I hope BioWare gets this right in the repeat here. That's what we're hoping.
Yeah, please, not another Andromeda. Please, just not. Not again. Let's figure this one out. And then the last one here, and actually this is interesting too from that Herbert conversation from Corey. I think it's a bit of an interesting question. Why fantasy experts? I don't like that word, experts. I'm certainly not one of them. Rich might be, but why have fantasy experts this year had such issues with ranking quarterback properly? And I think part of the conversation you had with Justin Herbert kind of expressed why we've seen some up and down performances from quarterbacks, because there have been, there's been a lot more kind of like relying on volatile production because the passing production hasn't necessarily been there as consistently with some of the offensive struggles that we've seen, specifically the passing game struggles. So I would assume that would be the answer, or maybe you don't even think that ranking quarterbacks has been tough.
I don't know the context of the question, like on a weekly basis or like preseason expectations versus the season-long expectations. I mean, there's something we'll go under the hood and look under to see what happened this year. But I mean, one in general, just from a top-down stance, I mean, passing is down in the NFL still. Like, it's bad. So like passing is bad. We've only had really, I would say, one great fantasy quarterback all year, and that's Lamar Jackson. And then there's been a couple good ones that we knew were be good, probably Josh Allen and Jalen Hurts. But I like Josh Allen. I even wrote last Sunday night was his first top 6 games since week 7. It was the first time he was a top 3 quarterback since week 3. Like, Josh Allen's been consistently good, but like he hasn't been like that guy in seasons past that has lived like just living it like as the QB1 every week, like Lamar Jackson largely has this year. Then you got like guys like Kyler Murray kind of fail, Anthony Richardson failed in the midst there, and I'm trying to think like who else was in preseason ADP like in that like QB1 range. But what that has done though is it's opened the door for some of these mid-range QBs that are just like QB like 10 through 15 every week, but they're consistently there. Sam Darnold, Baker Mayfield, like guys that are just consistently usable. And it's made those guys like very good this season. We thought Jared Goff was going to be there early in the year, but Jared Goff's actually been like a very just like spike week disappear for 4 weeks, spike week disappear for 4 week guy in your lineups. But more things that go under the hood definitely over the course of the season, but definitely league long impact. I don't know if I don't know if it's even really been an issue either, like to the degree that Corey laid it out, but I'm not sure the exact specific context of the question he was asking it either.
Yeah, and I think like that's what I was trying to say. The passing stuff, like Kyler Murray's a great example of like, so when he's getting this rushing production that's kind of more, he has a 50-yard rushing touchdown and it's more fluky and it hits it and you go, okay, we got good. But his passing numbers by and large have not been good all year. And so you're having more of that kind of that volatility. And we'll see what he's able to do. We're going to talk about him in a second. See what he's able to do this week in another kind of game that doesn't look like a great matchup. And then in the fantasy playoffs, he has a run of really good matchups.
Yep.
So is he able to kind of turn it around?
Same thing with Marv,
underranked then.
Like exactly. Like if you get through to this week with Marvin Harrison Jr., you have to be excited. Like you look at those 3 games they have in the playoffs, and you're just like, yes, it's I want to play all these spots. But to spin this to a different conversation, because I brought up the Baker and Darnold thing. This is why you still gladly swing and miss on guys like Anthony Richardson, where they were getting taken, because the fallback is you can still get these guys. You can get Geno Smith, you can get Baker Mayfield, you can get Sam Darnold, whoever pops up. Like, you can get these guys available, but you can never get Jaden Daniels again. When Jaden Daniels hits, you're screwed. Like, that's why you have to pay the capital on those guys, because they're priced there for a reason. They're priced there for their ceilings. When they hit, they're hard to combat, and you can't get those guys on waivers.
Yeah, no, I agree. On Geno Smith, if he could just throw some touchdowns, that would be ideal. Let's just get 1 or 2 touchdowns. Maybe we do that. I do have one more real or fake I want to hit you with, because I want to hear you, because I think I know what your answer is to this, that you don't actually care about this entire situation. But I want to hear you talk about Sincere McCormick, and whether Sincere McCormick, actually don't know. It's McCormick. I'm not sure. We're going to go with McCormick.
It's
Sincere
McCormick. Also, if I told you my name was Sincere McCormick, what would you choose? How many guesses would you have to get for my profession to get the NFL running back?
It would be several. It would be several. But I've obviously, I should know how to pronounce his name, since he's a San Antonio legend,
Yeah.
Sincere McCormick. But will he be a fantasy factor in the playoffs? Tell me how little that you care about anything going on in the Raiders backfield. Go.
No, it's open. Like, it's open for the taking. No one else is good there. It's just a matter of, can anyone get the grip on having the workload? And we've yet to see that, right? Even when they've started some of these guys that have been kind of jaggy, they started with Zamir White. Then they started giving Alexander Madison a lot of touches, and he was fine. It's like a volume-based dude. He wasn't efficient, but when you knew a guy, if a running back's getting 20 touches, you could run into something. So if he can become that player where he has the whole backfield, then there's an opportunity. But if it's still this situation where he is in like a split backfield where he's only getting kind of early down rushes, he's not playing at the goal line, he's not catching passes, like, what are you going to do, man? That's just the void for fantasy football. So I like everything that we've seen from him the 2 weeks. The coaching staff has talked him up. Like, they gave him more playing time after talking him up last week. We'll see if he continues to get more playing time with Madison, probably back at least. We'll see if Zamir White's back, but Zamir White really wasn't getting a lot of work but before his last injury anyways. So, I mean, TBD. I'll say it's wide open though. I'm open to the idea of him taking over the backfield. I think my confidence level in it is probably something like 25%.
Yeah, I mean, that's where I am as well. I've added him. If you don't need a running back this week, and you are already in the playoffs, right? And so you can just kind of go through and put people on your bench. I'm putting him on my bench because the Raiders have the Jaguars and Saints in week 16 and 17. And by then we should have a pretty good idea of what this is going to be. As you said, I'm heartened by the fact that it seemed like Alexander Madison was close to returning last week, and they just didn't bring him back. And then we saw McCormick get more work. We saw him activated to the, signed, to the main roster, right? And so we've seen that happen. And so we know that. And then, as you mentioned, he's just been better. I mean, it's a small sample, but he's averaged 5.7 yards per carry this season. Every other Raiders back this season's averaged 3.3 yards per carry. That's a gulf. Like, it's not even close. He's just been better. They need to see what they have in him. I'm hopeful, but it is just hope. And so the way that I'm playing this is, if you need somebody this week, I mean, maybe he's your best option, but he's more of a guy that if you have a good team and maybe you could say, okay, I have a flex spot that could be open in week 16 and 17, that you put him on the bench and you see how this plays out. Because if he is the lead back in that matchup against the Jaguars specifically, then we could really have something here where you're getting kind of one of those late plays. There's a question here: Sincere over Ray Davis this week. I mean, at that point, you're going with Sincere.
Yeah.
I mean, the thing about Ray Davis last week, and he got that early touchdown, and he's been doing a lot of that kind of stuff. But if you went and said, oh, well, he got 12 touches, 7 of those 12 touches were in the fourth quarter of the blowout. So we didn't really see the split that it might look like if you look at the box score. And so, yeah, so there we are. And then I do have to mention, I was going to skip over Westbrook-Ikhine, but we have a couple Westbrook-Ikhine questions in the chat. And so the real or fake is, can Westbrook-Ikhine keep getting away with this? That's the real or fake we have. What are we doing with Nick Westbrook-Ikhine?
Well, no, he can't keep away with this. But again, like, I just have talked about Nick Westbrook-Ikhine versus like someone like what Marcus Valdes-Scantling is doing, is that Nick Westbrook-Ikhine is playing and he's drawing targets. Like since they've traded DeAndre Hopkins, he's been on the field for 95% of the dropbacks. Like that's significant, right? Like he's getting the cardio and he's running routes, but he's also had 20% of the team targets in 3 straight games in 4 of his past 5. So like his target share is actually relevant. He's hitting like wide receiver 3+ target thresholds. So yes, he's getting lucky with the touchdown stuff. Yes. But at least if you say like, all right, well, I just need a guy that is on the field and he's got opportunity, he still has that. And you look at in the context of this week, this would be one of the spots objectively you would say like, if Will Levis could be okay, it's gonna be all right against the Jaguars, right? It's a home favorite. So you kind of go along for that ride and say, all right, keep plugging them in.
You can't wait. So I have a few 555 tickets, and I'm definitely spending one of them this week. I think there's a 555 this week. I'm spending one of them this week if I can on a Will Levis, Calvin Ridley, Nick Westbrook-Ikhine stack.
Well,
And I
I got some
can't
bad
wait
news for
it.
you because we did our show last night and initial optimals pushed out Will Levis stacks.
Oh no.
And we were like, "Oh, great! This is what week 14 is for like this DFS week is going to be amazing because of the quarterback pool. Like it's going to
Yeah.
be an incredible week. I mean, it's all streamers. Like because the reason I do rankings, I get this question a couple times a year, like why I do rankings after I do the worksheet is that I like to set my work as like expectations for the player. I don't want to have to start putting guys in a list and then have that drive my analysis.
Yep.
And this week's a great example of that because you get in to start ranking the quarterbacks and you're like, oh my God, I've got to put Sam Darnold like QB 4 through 6. Like I have to put like Kyler Murray. Like I don't even have great like expectations for Kyler Murray, but like in the context of the field, like you're playing Kyler Murray, realize all these other guys, like he's a mid-range QB1 in rankings. And like that's where we are this week. This is what's gonna make DFS so fun this week is like you've got that one guy, 2 guys, I would say, that can probably like bury the slate, Josh Allen and Jalen Hurts. And Jalen Hurts may be questionable if he's even going to do that now because the way they've not thrown the ball in the second half of games. But then it's just like wide open. It's like Stream City. And you can build stacks. Like Levis stacks are cheap. Aidan O'Connell stacks are cheap. Baker Mayfield stacks are a little bit more expensive. But like you're going to have these in a play this week in DFS across the board. And it's going to be a real fun week, even though everyone's going to have Isaac Guerendo.
Well, yeah, we have free squares too, which is going to be interesting. One more here. We had Kate Otten versus Juwan Johnson. I saw it in the chat a couple times. Wanted to hit it. I mean, I like Juwan Johnson. We're still on Kate Otten, right, in that situation.
I would still play Kate Otten in a 1v1. Yeah, I mean, just spoiler alert, because I know you've kind of teased it too. Like my 2 like uncut gem thing was Aidan O'Connell versus Juwan Johnson. But I just think for the game environment, I think Raiders Bucks has potential to be like a pretty fun game environment. Yep. My one concern with Juwan Johnson and the targets he gets, well, 1, Foster Moreau continues to get end zone targets, and then 2, just how much are the Saints even going to have to throw in this game?
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's a fair question. Yeah, I that's why we're on Otten there.
And Otten still did, and I know the box score wasn't there, but he was second on the team in targets last week. He did have 21% of the targets, so like he did get some opportunities.
We didn't see the passing game condense around just he and Mike Evans, which would have been probably ideal from his fantasy perspective. But it is still just he, Mike Evans, and Sterling Shepard. And Sterling Shepard only runs a route on 65% of the dropbacks or something like that. Otten is playing considerably more than that and running considerably more routes than that. And so, yeah, I mean, even if it's just around those 3, that's still a pretty condensed target tree as tight ends go. And so I don't think it's not what it was obviously when Mike Evans was out, but it is still, you're still pretty happy with the usage there. All right, let's talk about a few of these games. You've already hit on, and it's the Raiders, yes, and it's the Raiders. We play tight ends against the Raiders. That is what we do. A couple games here I just want to talk a little bit about. You already talked a little bit about Josh Allen and kind of the fact that we haven't had that ceiling. So if you're looking at Bills at Rams, Bills 4-point favorites, 49.5 point total. I believe that's the highest total on the slate, certainly on the main slate as well. I think it's not even particularly close, if I'm remembering correctly. It's not a lot of high scores out there, not a lot of high totals out there. And so, this is an interesting game. It's certainly a game that I assume will be popular for DFS. But unlike a lot of those other places, a lot of the guys in here are expensive if you're really trying to get to these main guys. But you've been talking about this Josh Allen stat for, what are we on, like week 6 or something, like you talking about this Josh Allen stat against man versus against zone coverage, and it's really interesting in particular this week given who they're playing.
The Bills in general are a team, because the Bills have scored 30 or more points in 6 straight games. They've tied a franchise record. None of their fantasy guys like get there. Like James Cook is like the one guy that like regularly operates as like a fringe RB1 because he's got so much touchdown equity. We've gotten blessed with the James Cook touchdown season. But yeah, this is a team that's continuously score points. They're kind of like the Chiefs in a sense, where they kind of play a lot of guys. They just play a lot of guys, and everyone kind of gets in on the action. And that's kind of prevented like a lot of guys from just blowing up, where we'd like to see just one guy have a 30% target share, get all the Josh Allen targets like it used to be Stephon Diggs, and he gets over for fantasy. Shakir is like the closest thing we have for like a consistent target in the offense. And Shakir is a great slot guy and possession catch guy, great floor wide receiver too in full PPR leagues, but he has one end zone target on the season. Like he's got 2 touchdowns of the year. He's the guy that moves the ball and then doesn't get any touchdowns. So that's kind of frustrating too. This in particular matchup is fascinating from both sides of the lens for what both of these teams do defensively. The Rams are a team that, once we talk about all, if they get pressure on the opposing quarterback, they're great. When they don't, they give up a lot of production, but they don't play any man coverage. Obviously this scheme predicated on zone coverage. And we bring up the stat again, and I'm going to keep bringing it up until it finally happens, but Josh Allen has not thrown a touchdown pass against zone coverage this season. The only other quarterback that qualifies for the league's passer rating that has not thrown a touchdown pass against zone coverage this season is Deshaun Watson. It's just a really wonky stat. It's just a really
how dare you put them together.
It's just a really wonky stat that I don't think it's like more fun to like bring up. Like if you're watching the game with your father-in-law, you'd be like, "Hey, Dad, but you know this, Josh Allen hasn't thrown a touchdown against zone coverage." He'd be like, "Get out of here!" Like it's probably more of the kind of type of stat it is, but. Josh Allen, again, like we talked about.
Hold on. I don't want to derail you. You call your father-in-law Dad?
Yeah, sure, man.
That's interesting. I wonder. I do not. I love John. I unfortunately John fell and hit his head the other night. I had to spend many hours and the wee hours of the morning at the hospital with him. Don't do that again, John. But
we're your real dad. Yeah, substitute friend, substitute real dad, substitute cousin, substitute your spouse. It's just like it's something you bring up during the game. Like one of those type of nuggets. But
I'm now interested. Like this might be fun for the chat. What percentage call their father-in-law or mother-in-law mom and dad? That's an interesting question. All right, continue.
Is that a regional thing? I don't know.
It is possible. It is possible that it's like a regional thing. I'm not
soda
sure.
Thing.
Yeah, which y'all are so wrong about, because the obvious answer is Coke. The obvious answer is all of it's Coke.
That's interesting, because that's usually like a Floridian thing where everything is Coke.
Sorry, I've derailed us. Let's see.
I don't remember where we were, but it's like, Josh Allen, we talk about this, his first like real spike week since earlier in the season. And it also took a play where he got credited for a passing touchdown and a receiving touchdown on the same play, which I'm pretty sure we're not going to get a lot of those. And then inversely, this game, the Bills face the lowest rate because the structure they play, their defense too, has much zone predicated on not giving up big plays. They're number 1 in the NFL in limiting plays of 20 or more yards, passing plays. They face the lowest rate of throws to wide receivers. We talked about this a little bit with the Tua sample when it was earlier in the season. We're like, well, they played the Bills twice. Like maybe that's steering some of these numbers to Jonnu and Achane. Turns out it wasn't. But they're facing a team. Matthew Stafford has the highest rate of throws to wide receivers. So it's kind of a fun matchup in that sense too. Also, they'll probably just try to run the ball with Kyren Williams since they got their offensive line healthy, but we'll see if they can keep the game close. But that game I think that game's fun. I think that game could be a lot funner and tighter than maybe anticipated, because what is the spread? It's I think 4.5, 5, something like that. But I think the Rams can hang.
I saw it as 4 this morning, but it's kind of bouncing in that odd zone. We also have the weird, you talked about how nobody's really getting there for the Bills, and we're probably going to add a couple names to that equation this week. I mean, I would be surprised if Keon Coleman isn't back. It seems like that's likely to happen. We have Dalton Kincaid getting a limited practice on Wednesday. We'll see. Maybe they want to, take it a little slower with him. Exactly. So we'll see if he's back. I'm not ready to say he's definitely going to play this week, but at least he at least has a chance to play this week, where that was not the case last week. And so
Mhm.
if we're adding more bodies to this, we already have Amari Cooper's just not running the routes. He had something like a 60% route rate in that game against 49ers, albeit, it was a blowout. And so you got to take some of that out of it. But like, he hasn't been running a ton of routes. And as you mentioned with Khalil Shakir, he needs the volume because he's not going to get a ton of touchdowns, and his kind of per catch kind of upside you see there, even though he does like catch every target, so that helps. But his kind of per catch upside is not where it might be for other people. And so, like, we're just adding more bodies to this situation that already is not producing a ton of value, especially if Matt Collins is just going to catch a touchdown every week. The only Matt Collins. And so it's a tough situation. And so I guess the question is, if Dalton Kincaid comes back, this is a really good spot for him. But like, how much are we trusting him? How much can we trust Keon Coleman? Like, what are we doing with these pass catchers?
Yeah, it's a question mark. We'd obviously like for Kincaid to just take one more week just to let us just say like, hey, we'll take Dawson Knox opportunity and throw it at the Rams matchup and
Yeah.
let that be that. Especially on a week like this, right? Where teams are really scrambling for some pieces in their lineups. But the wide receivers, I will say I'm going to play Amari Cooper in a league where I had Zay Flowers on bye just based on the matchup. I do think if was a shot to maybe believe that he could either catch a long pass or be viable just outright in this game, this is a matchup that has some signal for him. He hasn't run 70% of the routes in any game since he's been back. That's the bugaboo that we talked about. But he has played 85% of his snaps out wide with the Bills, and 23% of his targets have come on deep targets, 20 yards or further downfield. And that's where the Rams have been vulnerable. I mean, they allow the most yards per target to outside wide receivers. They're 31st in touchdown rate allowed to those wide receivers, and they've allowed 7 touchdowns on throws 20 yards or further downfield to wide receivers, the most in the league. And you say, well, that could also be Keon Coleman, right? But Keon Coleman ties also into this overarching theme that we led with, is that he can only get targets when he's against man coverage and get those chances. He's only been targeted on 11.8% of his routes against zone coverage versus 26% target rate against man coverage. And that makes a lot of sense when you think about how Keon Coleman has won as a rookie. So I do think if you're going to take a shot on one of the guys, I do think there's a little bit more signal for Cooper. Obviously, you're still just playing Shakir as what he is, but I'm a little more optimistic on Cooper this week, but again, it's in context of the field also and what you have to make in terms of lineup choices.
Where it's so odd where we're here now with Amari Cooper and Deontay Johnson, whereas before those deals happened, you
Yeah.
would be you would be like, "Oh, I really hope this guy gets traded to Buffalo. Would be a great spot for Amari Cooper." And now here we are. Baltimore, not as great. They have other guys there, right? With Zay Flowers and Mark Andrews, and maybe Isaiah Likely when he comes back. Be like, I don't know. It's a good offense, and it might be a good situation. Now suddenly the Panthers offense is actually good, and it'd be great if Deontay Johnson was just the lead wide receiver there for that, and he's suspended and can't play even when in games that Rashad Bateman leaves early. You're like, okay, I guess it's just strange. Be careful what you wish for, fantasy players, because it might not turn out the way you hope. I do want to hit, we're gonna run out of time here, but I do want to hit a little bit on the Seahawks Cardinals game because we talked about it a few weeks ago, a couple weeks ago now, whenever the first one was happening, and our kind of warning about that game was that these defenses have been playing better. These offenses haven't exactly been what we expected them to be, right? And so this game might disappoint, and that's exactly what happened. Now we're just moving this game to Arizona. We're kind of in a similar spot, 44.5 point total. It's not a super high total, but in the context of this week, actually isn't that bad of a total from a Vegas perspective. And I don't think much has changed for either of these defenses. I think the defenses are still playing pretty good. And the question is, why would we expect really anything different from this game than what we had, that other one in Seattle?
I mean, I don't think expectations are really moving. It's just the hope for that you catch the upside outcome, right? Because like when you
Fair.
look at
Yeah,
some of the
fair.
games and some of the players involved in this game, you're like, well, in their range of outcomes, this could happen, right? And that exists. But I think from an expectation stance, you're pretty spot on. That both these defenses, we've been talking about it all, kind of for a while. I mean, the Cardinals are just a complete bend but don't break defense. But we also have talked about the Cardinals offense. When the Cardinals offense can't run the football, their passing game wilts. They're a team that is completely built on playing, football that's just complementary. Like when they have to go into one asset of the game, when they have to throw the football, I think outside of that fourth quarter against Miami, it's just been really bad. And that kind of exists here in this range of outcomes. I mean, last time these two teams played, James Conner, I believe, had 7 carries for 8 yards. And like when you force the Cardinals to be a drop back passing team, you start to see some of the problems that they have offensively. And inversely, Seattle can't run the football. Like they have a 34% success rate on rushing plays. Only the Texans and Raiders are worse. And that started to be a problem for them this back half of the season, is that they're just consistently in third downs and third and longs. And that's just a tough way to live in the NFL. It's kind of caught up in them. Their points per drive have really sapped. And what the other thing that's happened, it was kind of all right earlier in the year because you're like, well, the defense is playing bad. Geno's just getting 40 dropbacks a game, 40 to 50 dropbacks per game. But now the defense is playing good. Geno's only getting like 30 dropbacks a game. And so like the fantasy points have been tougher to come by in that regard. So I feel very similar to you. I think it's probably a game where both these teams play like a bend but don't break style. It probably, if we get there, it's probably like low 20s. But if we do have like the jailbreak situation, this is one of the games you're like, there's at least star power here that could maybe carry the game to an upside outcome.
Yeah, and I mean, you would hope that, do we get big plays from DK? Do we get touchdowns from Kenneth Walker? Does he get, more of the receiving work that he had been getting, previously when we were getting really excited about him for the rest of the year? So yeah, there are definitely pathways here. James Conner is always a pathway for James Conner. There's always a long touchdown run for Kyler Murray, but I think kind of your read of it is pretty good. All right, let's move on, do a little uncut gems. Before we do that, are some questions here I want to get through. This one's really interesting. I'm going to force you to answer this one because I'm not sure. Should I drop Chuba Hubbard for Rico Dowdle? Who would you want for the fantasy playoffs? I mean, I'm going to give you some time to think about it. This week you would rather Dowdle. The
Next
Cowboys
week,
schedule, if I'm
Dowdle.
remembering, next
Well,
week,
they play
because
each other next week.
they play each other. Yeah, next week. So I think that's tough. Yeah, that's close. That's coin flip territory
I mean,
for me,
is
especially with.
Hubbard the only droppable player on this roster?
Yeah, like it seems to me you would have somebody other than Hubbard you could drop. But if we're just putting those two guys the rest of the season, I mean, with kind of what we saw with Jonathan Brooks, I'm not. I don't know. That's so tough, Rich. Do you have a yes or no?
I lean Dowdle just if you're forcing me to twist my arm, but I have to believe that if Chuba Hubbard's the worst player for you to drop on this roster, that this roster is really good.
Yeah, I would say that's probably accurate as well. Yeah, so
This
Cowboys
is
have
a guy that I will say this. This is probably a gamer that has like 4 defenses on their roster. Like there's like horde defenses for like play matchups.
Yeah, please drop one of those instead. Why is Dowdle available? That's a better question that I have here. But they do. I will say, Cowboys. Chuba or Rashad White, the only droppable two. Can't. This is from Derek again. You can't drop Rashad White. With what Bucky Irving's hip. Let's hope for the best, Bucky Irving. But DNP, we'll see what's happening. Yeah, that's tough. I will say the Cowboys have the Eagles in Week 17, and so that is less than ideal if you're hoping to make it to the
You're just trying to
Super
get
Bowl
to
there.
Week 17.
Yeah, get to Week 17. Dowdle's the better option, I think, to get to Week 17 where we are right now, which is what a time to be alive. That's where we are. The Rico Dowdle is kind of where can you imagine Amari on the Browns? Thank you. Yeah, can you imagine on the James Winston Browns? Be careful what you wish for, fantasy folks. Jordan Love or Baker Mayfield, Tracy or Guerendo. We don't do a ton of those. You go to the rankings on the website, and I'll answer those questions for you. You can go to Rich Hribar's fantasy subscriber chat on Sunday mornings. We send that out to all our fantasy subscribers on Sunday morning. There's a link. It's a private chat only for them. He answers all of those types of questions. You get that as part of the fantasy package, which again you can get for 20% off using promo code Angles. I will say though, Jordan Love or Baker Mayfield, that will be before that chat. So that's, we'll go for that one. Jordan Love or Baker Mayfield. Do you have any direct thoughts on that one?
I lean Love just for the upside, and like he's had a high floor too. I think he's the best combination. But I mean, I also like Baker Mayfield too. I have them 6 and 7 if it helps you.
Yeah, that's really useful. Really useful. I think I'm going Guerendo over Tracy.
Yeah. I'm not willingly playing any Giants players outside of maybe Neighbors as a volume-based wide receiver too, but We're at that point of the season where also weird things are going to start to happen. Like we could see this situation with Breece Hall, be it like where the Jets are just like we're out, like we're just done, like we're going to shut them down. These teams that are out of the playoffs, like the Giants right now, are just finishing these 5 weeks out. Like this team is dead. Like they're dead.
Yeah, although they did fight against the Cowboys on Thanksgiving, so it is what it is. By the way, we've been talking about that. We've been talking about that Bengals Cowboys game kind of offline, and about how confused we are by the line, and how people have allowed themselves to like believe on the Cowboys because they happen to hold on against the already quit Giants on Thanksgiving. And I don't know. Like I feel like we should put it out there how big of idiots we are, that we are both very confident the Bengals are going to smash the Cowboys on Monday. So when they don't, I want y'all to know how stupid both Rich and I are, because we are we're both way too confident in that. We're also going to need you to send us some money for Christmas if that doesn't happen. So keep that in your mind. All right, let's talk about some uncut gems, some people we might be excited about. And you've said the two that you were thinking about. I would suggest you take the quarterback because I've already got the tight end.
Yeah, and it's odd because with all these teams on bye, and it's like there should be some more guys, right? Like,
Yeah,
and
you would think.
maybe chat has some, because it's like it's hard to get excited about a Panthers wide receiver this week, right? Even even though they're probably gonna have drop back passes, we could say Parker Washington. I guess I thought maybe he would be like on your board, but I do like the Brian Thomas Jr.
He was
individual side of it more.
he was certainly in consideration. He was definitely a name I was thinking about there. I was also thinking about, because of this Hall situation, are we going Braylon Allen,
Brandon
right? Is
Allen,
this kind
yeah.
of like a situation where you see if you can get enough, touches on the wall? So there are names, and
Hmm.
put in the chat if you have other kind of uncut gems, we could talk about them. But yeah, it was somewhat surprising how difficult it was to find guys I really felt good about this week.
Yeah, that like was really propelling guys. It's like, oh, I would start this guy. Like there was a couple, like we had the Noah Brown spot a couple weeks ago. Like Shoemaker obviously got on board. So I think like I'm just gonna go with Aidan O'Connell because you might have Lamar Jackson on bye, you might have Jaden Daniels on bye. I doubt you were playing CJ Stroud, so but you might have been, and just like you just were trying to scramble. You weren't able to get a quarterback you like, so like you're reaching into the waivers this week. And O'Connell, I guess, stands out. Surprisingly enough, going back to last year, in O'Connell's last 6 full games, he's been a QB1 scorer in 4 of them. I was actually pretty surprised to find that out. He's only played 2 full games this year. One was against the Steelers, and then this. So like it's like, all right, if you don't get over on the Steelers, not many people have. It's not a big deal. And then he throws for 340 against the Chiefs, even though the Chiefs have been kind of down the last several weeks. Still throwing for 340 against the Chiefs is. We'll take that. We'll gladly take that. And I talked about last week too, the Buccaneers being better with both Jamil Dean and Zion McCollum back, and they were. They only allowed a 56% completion rate and 6.5 yards per pass attempt to Bryce Young, but they also allowed 16 fantasy points still, passing points. That was before you get to the rushing touchdown that Bryce Young added on. And for the year, they've allowed 17.2 passing points per game. So it was just right underneath their seasonal average anyways. So you do kind of have that. I do think this game too, from a DFS stance, is fun. I think this game could have some potential to be a game that has sneaky stack potential. It's 2 condensed target trees. So if you are playing Aidan O'Connell at 4,800, you know where the ball's going. You can pair him with Brock Bowers, you play him with Jacoby Myers. The other side, ball's going to Mike Evans. Like, so it's a game that has stacking potential too. We'll see if I end up writing it up, but it's on the table though. So I'm going to Aidan O'Connell.
Bucky Irving sits, you're feeling, I mean, we're going to get Sean Tucker for sure, and that's cheap, but maybe you're feeling at least better about kind of the Rashad White side of it. And so, yeah, there are opportunities here. Now that you've talked me out of my what I thought might be not as popular Will Levis situation, then then maybe we're going maybe we're going to Aidan O'Connell. Maybe we're going to Aidan O'Connell. We'll have to see what the ownership projections say as we get
Imagine not
closer to
using a
Sunday.
555 ticket on Aidan O'Connell.
I've been holding them because I haven't felt good for like 2 weeks, and so I've been holding it. I just need to use these tickets, and so I'm doing
Well,
it.
this
They're
is a
in.
wide open week, so it actually kind of makes
Yeah,
sense to use it, even though there's going to be condensed ownership on basically Guerendo, Saquon. Like, but
yeah,
the quarterback field makes it volatile. The rest of the field.
yeah. I do think playing some of that uncertainty is actually it's at least interesting. It's worth spending. It's worth
And you have
spending the
fewer
ticket that
games.
cost me $6. Yeah,
And
and you have fewer
it's the
games.
last week with fewer games. Well, although I think the
Yeah,
Christmas week, the way the schedule plays out, I believe that actual Sunday slate only has like 10 games on it too.
Yeah, because we're gonna have that week. We'll have what, 2 Christmas, a Thursday, and then a couple on Saturday, right? Like we're doing
Yeah, I
Saturday
think the
games that week
actual
too.
Sunday, it might be lower. It actually might be like 8 games.
Can't wait. Can't wait for the Christmas week schedule. It's gonna be a blast. My guy, I mean, we mentioned him a couple times, Juwan Johnson. Taysom Hill's obviously not a full-time tight end, and so like losing him for the season's not like, okay, well, Juwan Johnson stepping in and just replacing that. But we do have some numbers that suggest that without Hill on the field, you're going to get more of Juwan Johnson. Juwan Johnson has a 50% route participation rate with Hill on the field this season. He has a 63.8% route participation without Hill on the field, including 80% each of the last 2 games. So he's been on the field a lot. In those 2 games, been targeted on 21.7% of his routes. And so he's been getting the targets. We know what their receiver situation is now with all of these injuries. The Giants don't look like a great matchup on paper because they just haven't faced a lot of targets, but a ton of that has just been schedule driven. The tight ends they faced, even when they faced, teams that you might have a tight end that you like the Eagles, for instance, Dallas Goedert, I'm pretty sure didn't play in that game. And so we're not, it's been a lot of schedule based. They're 22nd in the NFL. They give up 8.1 yards per target to tight ends. This is not a matchup you're running away from. I think Rich's point, are the Saints going to have to throw enough for it to matter? That's a fair question for sure. But if we're really digging deep here, like in this kind of deep cuts, uncut gem kind of section, then Juwan Johnson is certainly, on that radar. If you lost Taysom, if you lost Dallas Goedert, if you're playing Mark Andrews, something like that, Zach Ertz, this is a guy that can certainly get you there. A couple here really not excited about Xavier Legette. I mean, he's going to play. I have less concern about what's going to happen to Legette's usage and target share if Jalen Coker and Jatavian Sanders returns than I do Adam Thielen and David Moore. And so I guess that's kind of the point, right? Does that seem fair?
Yeah, I mean, you're hoping to just get a touchdown at Leggett anyways. He leads the team since the trade of Deontay Johnson at end zone targets. But I mean, this Eagles team does not give up any points to wide receivers. I know that there's going to be garbage script, but there was garbage script in all those other games. Like the Eagles have been whopping teams and not giving up any points. The only receivers that have scored points against them are Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp.
I think you should play Saquon this week. Just going out on a
Just very, very wide limb.
throw that out there. We also got here from Connor, like Charbonnet as a spot start with tight end upside. Walker limited this week. I mean, it's kind of stuff, especially in this kind of week, where you can throw it at the wall. Like I mentioned, Braylon Allen. You could throw that at the wall with an injured kind of lead guy. We've seen Charbonnet take on more of that work. I believe that was in your worksheet, right? That we've seen him get a few more of those types of carries.
They've been using him as
So
a
maybe
short yardage back, which is interesting.
because he's not any better at it than Kenneth Walker is.
No, but it's also, yeah, but like, I can see a coaching staff with Kenneth Walker's rushing style, them talking themselves out of like that player being a good short yardage runner. And it feels like Seattle's kind of done that a little bit, but it remains to be seen. Those are always situations you're tough to say, like, this is this going forward. Like remember when Hassan Haskins had that goal line carry, you're like, I don't know how real this was. That's like still like where I am, like with the Charbonnet thing. It's like, is he for sure the goal line back, short yardage back now, or is it like?
This could be a good sliding doors moment. Did the Hassan Haskins fumble open up the door for the Kamani Vidal playoff run that we all deserve? That's the question. That's the question on all fantasy players' lips.
I think we know the answer is not
happened?
Gus Edwards. Is how I'll leave that.
Come on, Kamani Vidal, bring these best ball teams to glory. I'm rooting for you to get the work. I'm here for you. Seriously, this is the last one. We'll end on this one. Seriously debating starting Jonnu Smith over DK Metcalf at the flex, and I'm not even seriously pushing back against that. Like, kind of where are you? Jonnu's getting. It just keeps happening. He's just getting the targets. He gets targets. He gets thrown the ball. I don't know. I don't know how much I'm pushing back against that. Although that DK Metcalf could just, finally find his touchdown legs, get 2 touchdowns, 150 yards, and make you look stupid. But like,
Yeah,
I don't know. Where are you?
I mean, it's a good matchup for Jonnu again. I had some splits here because I remember getting excited for this game finally because I was like, oh, this is gonna finally be the Jalen Waddle game. Because Waddle, the last 2 years of Mike McDaniel, like has been really good against teams that run a lot of too high, like cover 4, cover 6 stuff. He's been like that guy. Just depend. And then I was like, all right, and I'm gonna pull up these numbers, and it's gonna show me all the stuff I was looking for, right? And I was like, oh, No, all that stuff's going to Jonnu Smith now this year. I was like, yep, that makes a lot
Jonnu
of
Smith
sense.
season.
I was like, that makes a lot of
Nice.
sense. So, like, so last year, Waddle was targeted on 30% of his routes against cover 4, cover 6, 3.5 yards per route run. This year, it's only 2.6% of his routes, 0.6 yards per route run. I mean, granted, Sauce is going to be out, so like maybe that opens the door for some more, but those plays have all gone to Jonnu Smith. He's gotten targeted on 37% of his routes with 2.94 yards per target on those coverages. So I was like, yep, there it's figures. This is can't even have one nice thing with Jalen Waddle.
Unbelievable. Free Jalen Waddle. I think we all can agree. Let Jalen Waddle fly. All right, that's it. That's it for us. We're heading into week 14. Good luck to everybody. We appreciate you listening along. Appreciate you in the chat. If you're listening to this podcast, we love that and appreciate that. Make sure you rate and review, do all of that. You can also join us live every single Thursday at 11:30 a.m. Eastern on the YouTube. Go to YouTube, search Sharp Football Analysis. You'll find our channel. You can subscribe. You get notified when we go live, which we do 4 times throughout the week, at least 4 times throughout the week. So make sure you're doing that. Head over to sharpfootballanalysis.com. Lots of great content over there, including Rich's worksheet previews for every single game. Read about every single fantasy player in every game this week. Get prepared for the weekend. Get all your questions answered in his subscriber-only fantasy chat on Sunday morning. Lots of stuff over there. All part of our fantasy package, all part of our NFL Plus package, which you can get for 20% off using promo code ANGLES. And Rich and I will be back to talk with you next week.